There is a bird living inside the Chernobyl exclusion zone with a growth on its beak. There are frogs there that turned black, spiders that have forgotten how to build a web, and somewhere in the ruins of Reactor 4, in a place so radioactive that machines fail and people can only stay for minutes, something is growing on the walls that seems to be feeding on the radiation itself. 40 years ago, this land was poisoned and then it was abandoned. What has been happening to the animals left behind is not what the internet told you. There are no two-headed wolves, no glowing deer. What is actually there is stranger, quieter, and in some cases far worse. 10 things Chernobyl changed, and the last one on this list is not an animal at all. Start with the ground, because you cannot understand what happened to the animals without seeing what happened to the earth they stand on. In the days after the explosion, the needles of the pine forest nearest the reactor turned yellow, then a deep rust red, and within weeks the trees were dead. The place is still called the Red Forest, and it is the most contaminated woodland on the planet. Walk to the edges where some pines survived and you find trunks that grew twisted and stunted and dense tangled growth erupting from the bark. Cut one of those survivors open and the year of the disaster is still visible inside the wood. But the trees are only where the story begins, because when those needles fell, everything they had absorbed fell with them. The contamination did not go away. It sank a few centimeters into the soil and stayed there. And in exactly those few centimeters lives an animal that can never get away from it. The bank vole is a small brown rodent, the kind nobody photographs. And that is precisely why it matters. It spends its whole life inside one small patch of ground, eating what grows there, breathing the dust of it. A wolf can walk out of a hot spot. A vole is born in one. Study them and you find elevated genetic damage, changes to their fur, effects on how they reproduce, even shift in the bacteria living in their guts. If you want to know what chronic radiation does to a mammal across generations, you do not look at the famous predators. You look at the animal that never leaves. At least the vole can run, the insects cannot, because they breed directly in that same contaminated ground, and their young begin life inside the dose. So watch what happens to a spider. In the most contaminated areas of the zone, something goes wrong with the geometry of a web. The spacing between the strands widens and drifts. The symmetry that should be automatic starts to wander. A spider builds from instinct written into its nervous system, and here that writing seems to smudge. And there are simply fewer of them. Counts across the zone find spiders alongside butterflies, dragonflies, and bees in significantly lower numbers wherever the radiation runs high. Fewer is the word that should worry you, because it is quietly doing more damage than any deformity. Consider the bumblebees. In areas of elevated radiation, the reproductive machinery of a colony falters, and fewer queens are produced. A colony without queens has no next generation. There is no monster here, nothing to photograph, just an extinction unfolding at a scale too small and too slow for anyone to notice, in a place where nobody was watching. Not every insect vanishes though. Some just come out wrong. Firebugs are the small red and black insects you find across Central Europe, and the pattern on their backs is normally a clean, mirror-perfect design. In an insect, symmetry is a receipt. It means development went the way it was supposed to. Collect firebugs from around Chernobyl, lay them out side by side, and the receipt is torn. Patterns warp, the black shapes blur and smear into each other. Some are missing an eye. Each one is a small physical record of a process that went wrong somewhere in the making. And so far everything we have looked at is cosmetic. Broken symmetry, a crooked web. A cataract is a clouding of the eye, and it is one of the classic signs of radiation exposure in a human being. In the zone, researchers find the same clouding over and over in birds and mammals from the most contaminated areas. Think about what that actually means out here. A predator you cannot see. A branch you misjudge. In a wild animal, failing eyesight is not an inconvenience. It is a sentence served slowly. But blindness takes one animal at a time. What comes next took an entire forest. Birds are the best studied group in the whole exclusion zone, and the finding that should be the headline is almost never mentioned. In the most contaminated areas, compared with clean ground a short drive away, researchers recorded a 50% drop in the number of bird species present, and a 66% drop in the sheer number of birds. 2/3 of them simply not there. The forests in those places look lush and green and entirely healthy. They are far too quiet, and of all the birds that stayed, one has paid more than any other. Barn swallows are supposed to be glossy blue-black with a bright red face. Inside the zone, scientists who have handled thousands of them have documented an entire catalog of things that should not exist. Pale white feathers scattered through the dark plumage, misshapen beaks, growths on the head and the feet, bent and wildly uneven tail feathers, clouded eyes, and underneath all of it, the engine driving the damage. Mutation rates in these birds have been measured at up to 10 times higher than they should be. Then comes the cruelest turn in the whole story. To survive the radiation, a swallow's body burns through antioxidants, the molecules that mop up the damage before it reaches the DNA. But those are the same molecules the bird needs to produce its bright plumage. So the fight leaves it faded, dull, less able to attract a mate. Chernobyl does not just make these birds sick, it quietly takes away the thing that lets them start a family at all. Everything you have seen so far is a bill, radiation arriving and taking something, but there is one animal in this zone that people say hit back. The eastern tree frog is a vivid green creature. Inside the exclusion zone, many of them are not green at all. They are dark, some almost pitch black. The suspected cause is melanin, the same pigment that darkens human skin in the sun, and melanin can absorb and neutralize some of the damage radiation does to living tissue. The theory is beautiful. In the years after the accident, when the radiation was at its worst, the darker frogs survived a little better, bred a little more, and passed that darkness down. Evolution, running in fast forward right in front of us, except here the honest version parts ways with the viral one. The scientists who have studied this zone the longest are not convinced. Go into Chernobyl today and you find dark frogs in clean areas and pale frogs in hot ones. If melanin were simply a shield against present-day radiation, that is not the pattern you would expect to see. Something real happened to these frogs. What exactly, and whether radiation is the cause, is still being argued over. Which leaves one thing on this list, and it is not an animal. Inside the ruined shell of Reactor 4, in rooms where the radiation is intense enough to kill electronics and hold human beings to visits measured in minutes, a dark growth spreads across the walls. It should not be there, and it is not merely enduring. Multiple studies have suggested that this fungus, dense with melanin, may be doing something no other organism on Earth is known to do, converting gamma radiation into usable energy, growing toward the source of it, the way a plant grows toward the sun. Samples have been sent up to the International Space Station to test whether one day it might shield astronauts crossing deep space. Hold the two ends of this list side by side for a moment. In the most irradiated building humans have ever built, a swallow sickens and loses the color that would let it find a mate. A bee colony quietly stops making queens. 2/3 of the birds disappear from a forest that still looks alive. And on the walls of the reactor that caused every bit of it, something dark and patient spreads out, and grows a little faster because of the radiation, not in spite of it. That is the truth about the mutant animals of Chernobyl. Not monsters, not superpowers, just a long, quiet accounting of what a poisoned world costs, paid out across 40 years in tumors, in silence, in empty nests, and one organism sitting in the heart of the ruin that seems to have been waiting for a world like this all along. Not great, not terrible, just alive and changed. If you want the rest of the Chernobyl the documentaries skip past, stay with us. Subscribe and we'll keep looking.